skull sits right on top of that. The two occipital condyles are sitting right on top of that. Imagine a 10-pound weight sitting on those two little tiny joints of this 3-ounce bone. Right, remarkable. And if it shifts off center, it can affect things, right? So muscles tone changes, everything changes. So what happens here, our body has this thing called a righting reflex. It always wants to keep the head neutral with the earth, not like this, right? If you go around a Ferris wheel, you're always trying to turn your head and get neutral, right? Well, the same thing happens. If there was to be a misalignment here, your body would try to correct. It wouldn't walk around like this, so it would shift your whole posture to get in front of this. So what happens is you have a mechanism here. On the joint surface, there are more nerves here for position in space than anywhere else in the body. They're called mechanoreceptors, M-E-C-H-A-N-O, receptors, mechanoreceptors. Mechanoreceptors are specialized nerve receptors like you saw in the skin. Remember when you studied the integumentary system, Meissner's corpuscles, right? Remember the touch receptors, Pacinian corpuscles, lamellated corpuscles, Ruffini's corpuscles. These are nerve receptors that pick up information of movement, any kind of movement. And remember, we learned about different types of receptors and ion channels. Remember that? So they have mechanically gated ion channels on those nerve receptors. So anytime there's a mechanical movement, it sends a message to the brain. It tells you where you are in space. If everybody just closed their eyes right now for a moment and put your hand out, don't hit your neighbor next to you, knock him out, and touch your nose with your finger. How did you do that with your eyes closed? Because you have mechanoreceptors in your joints and your muscles and your tendons telling you where you are in space. You see that?
So it's a
So you know where, yeah, mechanoreceptors are all over your body, but this is the highest concentration of any joint in the body because of the righting reflex. So what happens is, guys, is that this bone, we're going to learn about the C1 and the C2, they're the only atypical vertebrae in the spine. It's totally different. The whole anatomy and physiology of this area is unique to the rest of the spine. It's not something that you just fluff over. There's a lot of differences here. And what happens is, when this misaligns, and it can misalign because there's no one specific muscle that can pull it back into place. It's groups of muscles that are holding everything together. So if this does get misaligned, there's no bony locks on this. It's the only vertebrae in the spine like that. There's no bony locks. If that should misalign, it could potentially cause a serious damage and cut off your cord supply. That would be bad. You'd be dead in a second. So your body protects itself and shifts its posture all over the place. All right, so that's your occipital condyles. It has the highest concentration of what? The mechanoreceptors. The mandibular fossa of the temporal bone has the highest concentration of what? Nociceptor. Now let's see how this is in the jungle. Right? I was born in Africa, so I always try to think if I was in the jungle and I had to survive at night, right? How would I survive? Well, you have hearing right there. Right? You have the most pain-sensitive joint right there, and you have the most mechanically sensitive joint right in that spot. Why? Because this is the brainstem. Right there is the brainstem. And if anything damaged the brainstem, you're done. You don't breathe, your heart doesn't work, everything shuts off. You know, how do they kill people? If they had to put somebody to death, cut off the neck, right? Hang them. Well, the hanging doesn't choke you, you know that, right? The hanging fractures C2 and it severs the spinal cord at that level. And that's what kills the person.
Some of the jaguars kill
Go to the throat and the neck, yeah. Well, you know, if Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake, cut off the heads, right? So the quickest way to die is that, and it's the most humane way to die for animals, like we have halal meat and kosher meat. That's how they kill the animal. It's the most humane because it's a fast way of death. And being a former Marine and a sniper, the best shot is right there too. But if something was to come up against you, like a twig or a stick, and you were laying and you were moving into it, you'd hear it, first of all, and you'd sense it because it's so sensitive there, right? And any kind of pressure, you acknowledge it. You know, I was watching a UFC fight, and a guy got hit right at the atlas. He wasn't ready for it, and it got hit like behind his ear right there, and the guy went down. He couldn't get up for a while. He said the whole room was shifted. A very dangerous area here, and it's very vital. So look at how the atlas sits there between the mastoid and the styloid. Look at that. There's not much room there, right? You can barely see. So when I adjust it, I use an instrument. It's a stainless steel instrument. It has a tip that just touches the skin over that. And the patient's laying on the side and the bone gets shifted into position very gently. Pretty amazing stuff. So now let's go back to the rest of the skull here. We saw the frontal, parietals, occipital, temporal bone is on the side. There's something called a squamous suture, which you could barely see on this. Remember we talked about that shape of squamous, and I had mentioned it looks like the squamous suture, right? And then coming off the temporal bone, you have this other thing coming here. What is this?
Dramatic.
Well, okay, sometimes we just call it the bucket handle, right? That's what the Predator would put it on his belt, you know, all those skulls he got in that movie, The Predator. If you ever saw the movie The Predator, he was hunting people and putting them on his belt like that. But it's called the bucket handle, which is a very susceptible place to fracture, isn't it? Doesn't it look like it's just waiting to be fractured? And what happens is you have a bony process coming off the temporal bone that meets a bony process coming off the zygomatic bone, the cheekbone. So this is your zygomatic bone, and then it has a process coming out. If you look, I'm going to do a naughty. I'm going to draw right in this suture. There's actually a little tiny joint articulation between the two. You see that? It's scored and ready to be broken, right? If you had to chop something, you score it a little bit and just chop it. Well, look, you have the zygomatic bone coming here and the temporal bone coming here. So it's just like New York and New Jersey. You have a border of one and the border of the other, right? So this is the zygomatic. This is the temporal bone. This part of the zygomatic bone, if you're walking on the zygomatic side towards the temporal bone, is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. You get it? Okay, so look, if you're in New York and you're heading to New Jersey, and you didn't quite get to New Jersey, and you're standing there, and the border's right there, right? Let's say this was New York, and you're standing on this side of the border of New Jersey. You're on the New York border of New Jersey, right? Okay?
Okay.
So, or you could say, I'm sorry, you're on the Jersey border, you're on the Jersey border of New York, because you're in New York, right? And if you're on this side, and this was Jersey, you're standing on the New York border of Jersey, right? That's easy to remember, right? If you're standing in the state, you're in that state, and you're on the opposite state's border, right? Right, yeah, in the U.S., you're on the U.S. side of Canada, right? You're on the zygomatic side of temporal bone. So you have the temporal process of the zygomatic bone, just like the New Jersey border of New York, right? Or the Canadian border of U.S. And then if you're on this side, you're on the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. You get it? Together they form the zygomatic arch. Together they form the zygomatic arch. It's the most commonly fractured place in the face. If someone's going to get a facial fracture, 9 out of 10 times that's where it's going to happen. It's the most commonly fractured location of the face. So if you're a nurse and someone gets a blow to the face and it's swelling around this area, are you not going to have them get an x-ray? Of course you're going to make sure that they see the doctor and get an x-ray, right? Because it's a chance it could be fractured, and if it doesn't heal right, that could be a problem, right?
It feels so thick though.
Yeah, well, it feels thick, but it's easily fractured. Don't challenge anybody. Okay, so that's your view from the side, right? And you have your mandible coming in, the mandibular fossa, right? And I don't get too crazy on the mandible. You have the mental foramen here, you have the arch here, and you have the coronoid process. I don't really ask that too much. I'm more interested in clinically the temporal process of the mastoid, or the mandibular condyles, and the mandibular fossa on this, and the mental foramen. Looking at it from the front, and you have a beautiful image in your book. It's color-coded for the orbits, which is nice to use that. And studying the orbit alone helps you to go light years ahead in understanding the skull. If you just try to figure out what bone is what, and then go in and dig it out, it's more exciting like that. So you have your frontal bone still up here, 2 nasal bones, your zygomatic bone on either side, and then deep inside you'll see the sphenoid bone, and you can see it from the side a little bit. The sphenoid bone is an interesting bone, S-P-H-E-N-O-I-D, sphenoid. That is called the keystone of the cranium. So if you look at it this way, Now, your book holds it this way. Which one is anterior, which one is posterior, if you're looking at it? This is the anterior, because there's the face, right? This is posterior, this is the skull, the base of the skull. So if you look at this view from this image, you see inside, you see this thing, looks like a butterfly, right? And that's the sphenoid bone. It's the keystone of the cranium, and the reason why they say it's the keystone is, anybody know?
Every bone attaches to it.
Hmm? It's the keystone of the cranium, right, not the facial, right? All the cranial bones will attach to the sphenoid bone. So it articulates with all the cranial bones. So it's going to articulate with the frontal bone, it's going to articulate with the parietal, occipital,
So you're saying the sphenoid bones articulate with all the cranial
all the
bones?
cranial bones, not
Okay.
the facial, all the cranial
Cranial
bones, right? So there's a couple of cranial bones we didn't look at yet. We looked at the occipital, we looked at the parietal, we looked at the temporal, right? We looked at the frontal, and this is the sphenoid. There's a couple more. You have the ethmoid bone, and you have the vomer. The ethmoid bone is underneath, inside the nose, all the way up, stuck way up into the top, and the anterior portion, you can see it sticking through here. See, that's like plugged in there. You can't really, and your book has a nice color-coded picture there. So the ethmoid bone comes up, and it has something at the very top, and I always remember this when I went through school because I had a crush on this singer when I was younger, Crystal Gale. You know, she had long hair all the way down to her feet. So there's this long process coming up called the Christa Gale, right? Christa Gale, Crystal Gale, I always remembered it that way. That's for me. You know, you have these silly things that make you remember it. But this long Christa Gale helps to form an attachment for the meninges inside the brain. That's how the meninges attach. So the brain has to be attached by these coverings, and that's what that's for. And then on either side, there's something called the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Now, a cribriform plate, C-R-I-B, like a crib, cribriform plate is not something strange in the body. You see it in different spots. Cribriform plate is just simply a plate with tiny little holes in it, right? It's a plate of bone with tiny holes in it. In this case, the cribriform plate holes have another name for them, and they're called olfactory foramina. And that's for the cranial nerve 1, the olfactory nerve, for smell. You know what's unique about that cranial nerve? Anybody know what's really unique about it? It's the only cranial nerve that synapses directly with the cerebrum. It's the only cranial nerve that can synapse directly to the cerebral cortex. In other words, all other cranial nerves have to synapse at a junction first and then go up to those different centers. This one goes right directly to your conscious awareness, and that's why your smelling salts wakes you up, right? It goes right to your conscious awareness and you wake up.
The cribriform plate?
And that's why you have this whole field of, what's that field of smell therapy? What's it called? Aromatherapy. Because it does affect different parts of your brain. The sensory picks it up in the cerebral cortex and it goes to the emotional centers. And you could affect your emotions by smell, believe it or not. If you don't believe it, if you ever been around something that smells really bad, and you have a memory of it, that smell, yeah, see how you
Just
connect to
avoid
the
it.
memory? You just like, you know, as soon as you start to smell anything near it, you like run, right? It's like the smell of death. I don't know if you ever smelled death after it's been sitting there for a couple of days. That's a very nasty smell. And it's like you know that smell, you learn it. On the other side of the coin, did you ever have a nice boyfriend or a girlfriend that wore a nice cologne or had a nice scent? You never remember that smell. You're like, yeah, that was a nice smell. So it can affect your emotions in many different ways, right? Or for us guys, how about food? You know, you smell the eggs and the bacon in the morning. What's better than the smell of that in the morning, right? All right, so the olfactory nerves are for smell. They're tiny little nerves that come in and they go directly to cerebral cortex. It's a unique situation. All other cranial nerves don't go directly to the higher brain. They go to different locations and then up. Okay, so now let's look inside. This is a cool view, right? This is my favorite view. And you look at this going either way. If I was to put a stick this way and this way, that's what?
Optic canal.
Optic canal, which forms the optic chiasma. Those nerves would form this crisscross. See that? So that's how you know for sure that's the optic canal. See how when you stick the stick in there, it goes on an angle like that, right?
That is vision, right?
That's for cranial nerve number 2 for vision. What's that?
No, I just said vision.
Yeah.
Excuse me, miss.
This? It's funny, it was a couple of semesters ago, somebody sneezed. Was it in your class? And the girl goes, "Do you have influenza?" Somebody slides instead of Gesundheit or God bless you. Do you have influenza?